This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Evangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guest this week is Jon Jones, author of the memoir How I Escaped Evangelical Hell. In this conversation, Jon and I discuss his experience being homeschooled. Due to the content of this conversation, I'd like to offer a content warning. Jon is frank about his experiences with parental abuse and neglect, as well as moments of spiritual abuse and trauma, so please be advised. Jon shared some of his story on Twitter back in January when the Exposed Christian Schools and Exposed Christian Homeschooling hashtags were trending. We go into more detail on this show. Please note that we also recorded this conversation at the tail end of January when the temps were extremely low, so you may hear a space heater from time to time in the background. As always, you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/exvangelicalpod. You can join the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/exvangelical. You can also support the show by telling others about it and by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. Apple remains the top dog of podcasts, and even though there are a lot of podcast apps out there right now, many of them still consider that Apple Podcast directory the sort of canonical reference. So if you rate and review the show there, it does have a great impact for podcasters. So please do that for any show that you appreciate, including this one. You can also follow me on Twitter at brchastain, and you can follow the show on Twitter at exvangelicalpod. All right, let's get into it. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Evangelical. My guest this week is Jon Jones. He is the author of the memoir, How I Escaped Evangelical Hell. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Blake, thank you so much for having you on. I've been a fan of you and your voice for quite a while.
I really appreciate that. I'm really glad that we were able to arrange to talk right now. We actually started connecting more directly through sort of a Twitter conversation around the hashtags Exposed Christian Schools and Exposed Christian Homeschooling, and we're going to really get to that. But before we get to that conversation that's happening online right now, let's talk a little bit about your background and where you're from and get a good sense of what your early life was like.
Sure thing. So I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and raised primarily in Oklahoma City by very fervently believing evangelical Christians that decided that homeschooling was the way to raise the perfect godly boy, without caring too much about the further details of it. So I was homeschooled for my entire life, and most of my school career happened in Oklahoma City, where up until high school, whatever my parents could pick up when they could afford it off of the shelves of like a Mardell, which was a Christian bookstore in the Midwest. I don't know how big of a chain that is, but basically like whatever random school books they could pick off of school shelves, they would just feed to me when I had to fill out and do as a replacement for school, essentially. So they didn't like secular schools. They moved away from Atlanta, Georgia, where I was born, because they thought the homosexuals were taking over, and they wanted to protect me from that because apparently I was the world's most fuckable child.
Was that something that was explicitly told to you by they thought
that I would be kidnapped by homosexuals, out of the front lawn. Even as an adult conversation, I was asking my mom about it, and they were saying, yeah, the homosexuals are just taking kids off the front lawn, and they're kidnappings. And
oh my gosh!
It's usually family members, not like this mythical predatory homosexual with giant leather wings and talons and claws. The way they portrayed the outside world as being threatening was just comical.
And so that's what made them decide to relocate all the way to Oklahoma City instead. And that's where you spent the majority of your childhood?
That's correct. We had family out there. My father had 3 other children before me, and he decided to make me the weird Christian experiment. They all went to public schools. They're all like 20, 25 years older than me. And they're still fairly religious, but they had a more normal experience growing up. And
Was your father like a later in life conversion, or did he become more fervent, so to speak, later in life?
He got a lot more radical later in life.
Okay.
So he had me when he was 45, but so he was born and raised in Nebraska and then ended up in Atlanta, living there for several years, where he met my mother. But he was a religious studies major in college, as I understand it. And over the years, he just went further and further into the weird world of Christianity. Like starting in the 70s, he had this theory. Well, so he started getting into speaking in tongues and glossolalia and that whole like shaking a baby noise that's so supposed to be holy. He got really into that and actually been kicked out of Lutheran churches for his adoption and belief in the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues and going against their doctrines. I'm getting this like third and fourth hand. But he eventually got to the point that he believed he could hear the voice of God and communicate with God like an instant message back and forth. But this is in the 70s, and he didn't have a computer yet. And so he would literally write down his prayers and questions to God and then write down what God told him in like a different script and a different font. When he was using word processors, he'd switch the font, but he would basically be writing out instant message style conversations with God. Like, what should I go do today? Should I kiss my wife? What about this business deal? And he would spend anywhere from 2 to 8 hours a day, every single day, writing out all these conversations. And I inherited the storage unit full of these written notebooks of conversations. Like I threw away probably 10 or 15 like standard moving size boxes of handwritten notes to conversations that he believed he was having with God over the course of like 15 or 20 years.
Wow. So this was sort of this compulsion that he had. Was that something that, I mean, you're a child, so like when this was going on, like what was your understanding of how he was acting?
Well, he definitely had his authoritarian tendencies, and he loved them. And he also came from a background in sales. He was a life insurance salesman and fairly good at it. So he was basically able to believe in Christianity enough, but leverage his sales acumen enough to believe he was still being a decent Christian while fleecing people out of their money and basically using his compliance tactics and knowledge to con people out of their money, pretending to be a spiritual advisor, pretending to set up business deals, just using weird like barter and using his religious connections to keep us alive. Like he never had a real job the entire time I was alive. He was mooching off friends, family, and just conning people, using God and his Jesus-y credentials as his way in. And he just basically created this whole world where, like, for me and my mother, where he made us believe just through his temper tantrums, his manipulation, his nature, that he was literally the voice of God and represented God because he put in all that time learning how to pray. Like he loved self-improvement books. He loved all the whole self-improvement industry. And part of his effort to become closer to God was him writing down all his instant message conversations, essentially, before that was a thing, with God. And over time, through his self-improvement kick, through his manipulation, through his just carny showmanship, he genuinely fooled himself into thinking that he got really, really good at listening to God, so much that he didn't even have to really listen that hard anymore. He just learned how to listen, and then he'd start managing his family that way. Like if I wanted a toy, he'd make a big show saying, "Here, let me ask God, the arbiter of everything in the universe, to know that." Like his whole thing was, I don't do anything God, so I'd ask, "Can I buy this toy?" Say, "Let me ask God." That way, there's no way you can possibly say no to the owner, the creator of the universe. No, God doesn't want you to have your toy. But what do you dare question the voice of God from your father. Like he'd just intimidate us into doing what he wanted and believing that he had just become this super amazing hotshot, instantly hearing and divining the will of God and monetizing. And he limited he had me later in life, and he just wasn't that interested in raising children. And he decided that I would be an experiment in his weird, like, min-maxing, high optimization, being the best Christian kind of life. Like, what if we just homeschooled this little bastard of mine and didn't expose him to anything in the world? No media, no television, none of the homosexuals in the world. At that time, there was a lot of business in creating Christian curricula or Christian media or ripping off Christian media, ripping off secular media to make it Christian, to mark up the prices to sell it to Christians. And so they were, at that time, the Accelerated Christian Education and the School of Tomorrow, which except for the word Christian, that almost sounds like Sky Captain of the World of Tomorrow. Like this seems like a cool thing, just like education, the world of tomorrow, optimize your children. They're basically selling a prepackaged system for creating a subservient little Christian drone without worrying too much about the details. And if you did start digging into the details, then the only response they really had was just like, wait, this is the Bible, this is Jesus. They just name dropped God and Jesus enough to avoid scrutiny and keep brainwashing and doing what they're doing. And that ended up being a pattern. Like, it's not that I object to Christianity in of itself or homeschooling in of itself. It's just the two of those are very, very powerful tools for controlling information, controlling access to people, and doing it in a way that is very awkward to question without someone trying to make it seem like you're attacking their self and their religion. It's like a Russian nesting doll for abuse. Yeah. For being able to keep children hidden and experiment on them, do what you want. Yeah. It was weird gradually becoming more conscious of that. And because my media was so controlled, I didn't really know what he was or who he was. I believe he told me that when I asked him what his job was when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, he told me he was a billionaire. Really? A billionaire. Because over the years, he'd convinced himself through my analogy for it is through huffing his own farts. Through typing what he thinks God is telling him back to himself every day for, at this point, 20 or 30 years. Your brain is pudding, but you believe it so much you can force that kind of intimidation and intimidate people into buying into that sort of belief system. And because I didn't know any better, because I couldn't, because he didn't want me to, I viewed him as an unassailable voice. And the billionaire thing, over these years of turning into just a man with a head full of mush that was also a huge dick, he convinced himself that every day he put in a solid 8 hours writing down what the voices in his head were telling him to do, that he would make exactly $57 million, not one penny more, not one penny less. Daily rate, $57 million. And that went into a special heavenly bank account accessible to him and him alone, but only if he is faithful enough, a servant. So he had us convinced that he was doing such important work jerking off to porn in his locked bedroom when he was supposed to be talking to God, which I caught him doing. And there's a funny bit in the book about it where I found the cookies from his pornography use after he told me that my bike got stolen because I touched myself at night. Story for later. But he built up this whole concept of this heavenly bank account that he can access someday. And he would actually, with his experience in sales and manipulation and just name dropping God often enough till people just stopped questioning his intentions and motives, he would actually convince multiple realtors to take him around to multi-million-dollar mansions around Oklahoma, because we lived in a 500 square foot apartment that we were in constant risk of getting evicted from because he would not take a normal job or work. But he would take us around all these multi-million-dollar mansions and tell us, we're going to live there. You're going to have he was fixated on private jets, private planes and having a Mercedes or a Cadillac of a different color for every day of the week to drive. Like, he got real into the prosperity gospel stuff, like Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar.
Yeah.
Is there any more in "Hi, I'm an asshole" name than Creflo Dollar? I mean, he's pretty clear about what he's about.
Yeah.
But my dad would send our rent money to these fuckers. I remember hiding from the apartment management trying to come and evict us, pounding on our door, just hiding inside with the lights off, waiting for them to leave, because my dad would send seed money to Kenneth Copeland so they can go kill elephants in their private jets, because my dad thought that would get him his one day.
Mm.
He's 100% bought into all the Jim Baker. He had a story where he was with my family. He was trying to brag about being a big businessman before my family refused to speak to him ever again. He bragged about giving $1 million to Jim Baker. Like, this is before he went to prison and was disgraced.
Yeah. Before his comeback.
Before his apocalypse buckets. It's like it's like he's selling apocalypse food bags because Democrats and abortion. I can't remember his thing.
Some combination of those two things.
It's like one of those things. Just like, pick a word from column A, column B, column C.
Yeah.
like Christian Mad Libs. It's like like liberal babies are wearing pussy hats. Well, frankly, that's like most of my family's Facebook.
There's a lot of truth there. So yeah, you're growing up in this really abusive environment, and you detail this in your book as well, talking about all these different compulsions and these thought patterns that your father would be subject to, and that he would be irresponsible with money. He would control you, manipulate your emotions in really abusive ways. Part of what you talk about throughout the book is that you do have a connection to the outside world that is limited. One of the things you talk about is like social interactions with other kids. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you were raised and how you were able to make friends or have trouble making friends?
Certainly. That was one of the more odious marks that homeschooling's left on me over the years. The lack of social interaction. They didn't care enough about my well-being to second guess the idea that they just never need to expose me to anyone that's secular or anything that they don't agree with. They, for a while, like, my parents' sort of unstated quasi-stated goal was to prevent me from making the mistakes that they had in their life. And when they considered one of their greatest mistakes is not running absolutely everything they do, think, say, feel, or think about feeling by God first, without understanding that you need some degree of life experience to understand, like, why someone might need a God or why someone might convert. They just wanted to spare me what they thought was their pain of coming to salvation by just removing those choices from me entirely and teaching me the right thing. Without context, without knowledge of the tree of good and evil. They believed that anything that was not explicitly out and out, like, super Christian, super godly, was evil. And they, before moving to Oklahoma, which is where the real isolation began, I had like a handful of friends in the neighborhood. I was like up to like 6 years old or whatever. They wouldn't let me go very far. They had limited my interaction. And they, even down to the point where, this is actually where I first started realizing that I was different in a bad way. Sadly, a recurring theme. To toys were a big thing. It's like having like toys and media and television shows or things like certain things in common. I was like Ninja Turtles were like just the thing at the time. They were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. Every kid had them. Every kid knew about them. Like when we'd go to like Target or Walmart or wherever, there'd be like Ninja Turtles cereal, Ninja Turtle toys, Ninja everything. So they didn't like that the Ninja Turtles were not Christian. They told me that that apparently I watched Ninja Turtles and I hit a kid once, and they decided to stop letting me watch it forever. At which point, all the kids in the neighborhood refused to speak to me because I didn't know Ninja Turtles and I couldn't. And I was the weird one. Like, what? You're not allowed to play, you dummy? What? Like, I'm not playing with you. So I was begging my parents just to. I didn't understand the religion aspect of it. It's just like, you won't let me play with turtles.
Yeah.
But eventually they allowed me conditional ownership after a lot of begging. But the conditions of ownership were that I was not allowed to let those Ninja Turtles fight ever. Every Ninja Turtle is a Christian, but in the only acceptable action interacting between these Ninja Turtles is leading each other's souls to Christ. And I had a little pamphlet, a little brochure next to me that I had to read correctly to them while my parents observed my playtime. So that I would make sure not to let these Christians stop free-saving each other. And so they explicitly would not fight. And of course, whenever they weren't around, they just beat the shit out of each other because it's awesome. Right? So Ninja Turtles. Ninjas are not pacifists. If you're like... It's not a pacifistic property, no. But that was my first taste of finally being allowed ownership over something and being able to interact with other children. But because apparently I was, as a 5-year-old child, of the world's sweetest asshole, and every homosexual on the planet knew it. So they had to whisk me off to Oklahoma City, where I guess that isn't a problem. That's when they started isolating me more. I moved there the week of my 7th birthday. And that's when they would go to like Christian bookstores and pick up books for me to go through. It's like Christian workbooks, like one Adam plus one Eve equals. I mean, they're like 20 pages long. They're absurdly bad. So that was what passed for education for me for many years. I went to my brother's church for a bit. My parents weren't welcome. My dad had a habit of getting kicked out of churches because he kept trying to fancy himself as a spiritual leader. And I ended up just going to those churches alone because I would just beg to, because they didn't care enough about my welfare to send me or to involve me in a club or anything. There were a handful of attempts to socializing with other kids, but it was so, I've been so isolated for so long. I didn't know how to interact. Like when I was 9 or 10, there was a homeschool baseball league, not even enough kids for 2 teams, and there was no such thing as losing. And I remember I went, I think I went there for a season or maybe part of a season. My dad actually was one of the coaches. But I remember very vividly, I liked baseball. I collected baseball cards. I was allowed to for some reason. It's like, it was like a swinging pendulum of abuse and neglect, it's taken years for me to kind of accept it as that. Because first of all, I was thinking of abuse. I'm just thinking of someone just smacking the crap out of a kid or just messing with their mind. But neglect is also a form of abuse. And I'd misidentified originally neglect as just a moral failure on my part for not trying harder. Mm-hmm. And having those opportunities. But they, I went to the baseball camp. I remember I got a single somehow. I rounded the bases gradually. I remember running from third base to home plate, and apparently I skipped right over it. I was so happy to get a home run. I felt like I belonged. People are laughing and waving. And apparently I skipped over home plate, and one of the adults walked after me on my little victory lap, just smacked me on the arm. and said, "You're out." You skip right over it. It's like merciless. Like not. I handled it poorly. I don't remember the next moment. I just remember crying a lot and running back to my parents' car. And then a few months later, a kid came up and knocked on the window, and I wrote up in my book. I can't remember the exact words, but he was asking me how I was doing, and they told me that my dad sent him over because to see if I was doing better. But everyone thought I was a pussy.
Oh my
So
gosh.
like one of my only first positive interactions with people my own age, and I blow it spectacularly. I'm made a fool of, and then it's like my face got rubbed in it, and I don't think I ever went back again. There are a handful of there's Vacation Bible School they sent me to once. There like occasionally the church would send us to some sort of event, but I'd have a colossal panic attack or anxiety attack, and I'd have to stay in the bus, or I wouldn't be able to go into the park. I'd just be freaking out and shaking and crying and not able to interact with other people because I thought I was doing everything wrong. I didn't know how people worked. I knew how different and wrong I was, and even though they were Christians, I still wasn't the right kind of Christian. My parents didn't even go to the church because they'd been kicked out. So I was basically the first church I went to, my brother's church, had what the kids called bus kids, which is basically just kids from a black neighborhood that they would bring to church. But they're trying to bring these kids to church to do a good thing, but the way they're the only black kids at the entire church, and the entire church was incredibly white. So all these kids, age 7 to 12, and their parents are basically just seeing these poor, dirty people coming in. Essentially, that's how they viewed them. It's they're just well, this sounds terrible, but the way it was taught is they're black, so they're poor, and their lives are shit. They don't have jobs, they don't have parents, they just reproduce as fast as they can. There was a lot of weird white supremacy that was incredibly normalized in my church experience.
Yeah, that's awful that it was framed that way or let to be sort of implicitly framed that way.
And no one would speak up. It was so weird how normalized all of that was. It wasn't ever really overt. It's just so oh, this guy is blue. Oh, this is a blanket statement of an entire race. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I wasn't. I know there are parts of Christianity that go into the Sons of Ham and trying to find biblical justification to be even more white and even more shitty.
Right.
But for the most part, I avoided the formalized versions of that. But for years, I'd struggle to go to church. I'd struggle to interact. And it was basically just me begging my parents to drop me off at the churches they'd been kicked out of while they did their own freelance thing at home, developing their own weird theology. When I was 15 or 16, and at that point I was no longer a believer, but my parents hated that. They wouldn't let me go anywhere. The only place I was permitted was to go to church because they thought it would set me right. And I accepted and went because that was the only place I was allowed to interact with people my own age. Everything else was evil. Everything else was wrong. They would actually, over the years, my parents would occasionally just take control of my computer, demand I give over all my passwords, all my personal information, or they would take my computer away forever and never let me go outside again, which was a threat that they toyed with a lot and half exercised sometimes. So they would just force me to go through and prove, explain, okay, who's this person? Is he Christian? He's not a Christian? You're not allowed to be friends. You're going to write an email to them saying you can no longer be friends with this person. I'm going to watch and make sure you send it. It just at random, they would just jump in and make me prove everything that I was doing was godly. And they would take things away and punish me with hellfire, taking things away. It's a weird thing to admit, but in all honesty, I had been just completely broken and cowed and had no will to resist, just because my dad was able to make me fear that much and control me that much.
I mean that is an understandable response to your environment. I mean, you're trying to survive within that context. That's awful. I'm sorry.
Thank you. It was, I mean, one of the one of the things that's really started to hit me more and more as I've been as I was researching my book and trying to validate my experiences instead of going purely off of half remembered notions and contacting people in my past to validate some things. As I as I became more and more self-aware, as I educated myself more, I started to become interested in the role of what a teacher is. And before I met my awesome wife, I dated a woman that was a teacher, and she taught second and third grade children. And I actually got to go inside of a school for the first time. I got to sit in on classes. I got to meet these kids. I had a sugar glider, a flying squirrel, as a pet, and I got to bring the flying squirrel to class to show to these kids for a show and tell, which I'd never seen before. I got to meet the other teachers and hang out with them outside of school and see what their lives are like. See how just to see how they discuss, like, I was dealing with this child today, and there's somebody complaining, but other times like this child's parent really stepped up. This child did a great job, and this was an amazing thing. And even like their day-to-day struggles, like I didn't have enough paper to print out all these tests, but fortunately, Julie's husband works in an office and he can get sheaves of paper for free. And that was like their source for printing out enough tests for these kids because they don't make enough money. And it was the first time I'd actually seen what the profession of a teacher was in the context of a school. And over time, the more I dig into homeschooling and see what the curricula are like different curricula outside of what I've had, it's interesting to me. Well, in addition to how I view homeschooling, also just the nature of boundaries and how I don't think boundaries can exist in even like an evangelical Christianity practiced as intended.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And having someone that is a combination parent, teacher, and moral arbiter, who in the context of Christian education their job is to eliminate those boundaries and make them invisible so that they can breed compliance in a sense.
Right.
And it's honestly only the last couple weeks that I've realized that, like, reading through like exposed Christian schools, exposed Christian homeschooling, seeing what those have in common makes me realize like what an abrogation of responsibility, what a moral violation it is to have someone that is meant to educate the mind and intellect be plausibly in a position to ask, are you having premarital sex? Like, or just even ask what children are like thinking or feeling. Like, this is a wrong thing to feel. If you feel this way or do this thing, then this invisible man in the sky that loves you very much will make sure you burn fucking forever. And 2 + 2 is 4. Like, it's a weird combination of responsibilities that I feel are deeply, deeply incompatible. And with a heavy caveat, because I've heard enough from butthurt homeschooling parents, and think anything critical said about homeschooling at all is a personal attack on them, which is, I mean, they're way overselling themselves. I don't think of them at all. But I know that's my experience is not universal. I've only had this one particular experience. I've spoken to a lot of people that have very similar experiences, but teaching things like the promise of education for me was that I would be equipped to deal with real life, that I would understand the kind of that I'd be prepared to understand the kind of problems and trials and tribulations that are going to come at me in life, and that I would be educated to understand how to either prepare and equip myself for those types of situations, or understand how to seek out other people with certain skill sets and be able to bring those resources to bear. It's been tragic and heartbreaking learning by degrees that I was taught everything wrong deliberately as a spiritual affectation, and that just the fact that there was a cross on it or the word God or Jesus was literally as much as they needed to prove and to think that, okay, yep, our son's getting a great education. I wasn't taught evolution. I was taught that man and dinosaurs walked in the earth at the same time somewhere because some Christian creationist scientist, because my God, like all the scholarly studies and the discoveries that they've produced, endless reams and tomes. But I was taught that some creation scientist somewhere saw a T-Rex footprint next to a human footprint. So checkmate, atheists. It's like 2 paragraphs covering evolution. It's basically is talking about how stupid and evil people that believe it are.
Mm-hmm.
Like 20 to 40% of my final grade in high school was memorizing Bible verses.
Wow.
If I failed that, I would fail high school. It was staggering. They taught me all the wrong things, like the spiritual warfare, intercession, being slain in the spirit, all this. In my angrier moments, I think of it as evangelicalism as a dipshit hillbilly affectation, just because that's how it was conveyed to me. And it's difficult coming to terms with the people whose job it was to set you right and set you on your path through life and keep you alive, and did nothing but gaslight, manipulate, and hurt me just to keep me compliant. And it's when I was saying earlier about the swinging pendulum of abuse versus neglect, the application of the discipline, the application of these harsh limitations on my experience, when I'm allowed to experience, that's the abuse. But not caring about the outcome or the result or how I'm actually doing is the neglect. And it's taken years for me to identify and acknowledge the neglect, because it's like it's naming a lack.
Right. Yeah. It's that harder and impossible to prove a negative. And a lack is not the same as a negative, but
exactly.
Yeah, it's harder to identify the thing that you didn't know, that you didn't receive, that you should have.
Exactly. And that is beautifully phrased, because that is a perfect springboard. I just like with homeschooling. I mean, just even today, like I was not given the benefit of understanding evolution or even cause and effect. Like I was taught that a stomachache means that I sinned and I'm literally possessed by a demon.
Good. Sorry,
Like,
that's yeah, wild.
It's actually,
you're going to hear some flabbergasted sounds on this side of the call.
What was done to me is unconscionable. It's insane that anyone could ever teach these things to a child. Like there's no such thing as being sick. Like you're not sick. No one is sick. You're possessed by demons. I've been through exorcism school. My dad had a thing where he had a friend that ran a class on exorcising demons out of people, and he rented it was like the front 2 or 3 rows of a disused church, like on a weeknight. So it's all. I mean,
wait, they had per row rentals?
They could only fill the 3 rows.
Okay. I was like, man, they are really they were way ahead of like all these co-working spaces. Holy crap.
Also a courtesy of Creflo, Nickel, and Dime. So they'd barely fill like the front of this little church, and of course it's all fucking boomers. I mean, nobody outside of that age group. So my dad wanted to establish himself as like the super leading holy guy that is, like I can cast out more demons and this and that, and I'm super Jesus awesome. So I was 13 at this point and fairly truculent. I was I knew things were wrong. I knew I did not have a normal life. I was very resentful of it, and at that point, I was already working on my escape. But he brought me to the exorcism school just to keep proving to me what is real to him, and he volunteered me as an exorcism test dummy. Out of curiosity, have you seen that bit in the book?
No, I haven't. I have not gotten to that point yet. Actually, I
Exorcism
think
school.
I was at that chapter when I got pulled away to do something related to parenting tonight. Sorry.
No. In all sincerity, I'm so grateful that you just acknowledged my book and have looked at all. I feel awkward pushing it. I feel awkward
No,
promoting it.
you absolutely should, and I think it's important for the sort of conversations that are happening over the last few weeks.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. It's finding validation, finding out that I'm not alone has been more valuable than anything. I thought it was just me for the longest time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So for the exorcism school, my dad would just take out his frustration on me in a group setting.
Oh my God. Was it like
So
the airing of grievances or something? Like in
yes,
Festivus or something?
yes, except for the laying on of hands. So I'm surrounded by so many sweaty old people pressing their hands down on me, speaking in tongues, which is the stupidest thing. If I had to point at one thing in all of Christianity that I thought was absolutely the most stupid, speaking in tongues is absolutely it. I know there's historical reference, glossolalia. It's not unique to Christianity. People having the fits of religious fervor.
Mm.
I've only seen the Midwestern white mom and dad version of it.
Yeah.
Which is there a Midwestern mom and dad version of anything that could be considered superior except for maybe like Truckliner? But I only saw like the stupidest, silliest parts of it. Just the
Wow, that's crazy.
it's
That's nuts.
that they all believed it. So my dad would. Sorry, I'm putting my head back in it. My dad would put his giant hand on my forehead, practically grabbing it, and then he'd be just yelling out things that pissed him off about me. It's like, in the name of Jesus, he'd name them like demons. In the name of Jesus, Lord God Almighty. That was actually like his style of tongues. It's just like quickly scatting. He would say, in the name of Jesus, I command you, talking back to your parents, get out of my son in the name of Jesus. And getting up later than I like. Get out of my son, you demon. You name lust and pornography because you assume you think a 13-year-old boy is not having 24/7 constant erections? It's like you don't need God to tell you that. But he played that card. But yeah, so he just assumed that I was whatever. So in the midst of like 10, 15, 20 old people like pressing their hands, sweaty hands into me and speaking in tongues while my dad is yelling, they just kept me like that for what felt like forever. And then finally my dad just ran out of steam and they all stepped back and would smile at me and look at me like they're waiting to be thanked.
Mm.
It's like it's though they'd done me a favor. So they basically just yelled out all of my imagined flaws because I'm a 13-year-old boy that pisses them off, and they get to feel like big, awesome prayer warriors that cast out demons. All I gotta say is they cast out plenty of demons to leave room for euthanasia.
Oh man, that is insane.
I was an example, like a demon exorcism test dummy, just because I pissed my dad off for not his big mistake was he always loved technology. He was always interested in business, and he would pitch himself as a consultant, and you have to have some kind of like business or technical edge to do so. And he was always an early adopter of technology. Mm-hmm. So I always got his hand-me-down computers, and I had internet access and bulletin board access. And because of the swinging pendulum, of abuse and overexertion and control and neglect. When the pendulum swung toward neglect, I learned how to use a computer better than he could.
Yeah, I want to actually talk about that in particular because I think that is a really salient thread that appears in your book is that you were able to find these sort of like entry points into broader culture through media. And I know that this is something that this was pre like internet being everywhere. I mean, there was still internet and all of that was available, but media was different. You didn't have everything on demand all the time. You weren't being like bombarded with media. There was no social networks except for earlier versions like bulletin boards, like you mentioned. So within that context, how was finding things? You talk about finding like a sort of space that was yours in video games and in certain types of like science fiction that were considered basically like non-threatening or not evil, even though they weren't explicitly Christian. How did that help you cope?
It was, you know the saying, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. That was my kind of my situation. Once I realized that I have access to see things that he doesn't necessarily need to approve, and I can conceal the technological means for doing so. It honestly, it was more of a spiritual and moral quandary, more than it was a technical one. Just because I was taught that God can read my thoughts, read my mind, read aborted thoughts, like even just like an impulse or thinking. There's no such thing as thinking accidentally or an accidental thought, like
Right.
Pressured, like intrusive thoughts didn't exist. Those are just demons. So I was taught to like self-police, like any wrong thinking thing or any doubt or any question. I was basically trained to just like murder that thought before it could proceed.
Yeah.
So I had to get over that mental block at first, but my dad was interested in technology and video games enough to give me an initial interest, and it was id Software and Commander Keen were the first games that he would and Sierra and King's Quest. Those are the first games I saw, like a platformer Mario style, and then like a role playing adventure, click adventure type of game. So he showed me those, and I got involved in those. I had my older brothers are also big into video games, so I got exposed through that as well. And because that was one of my dad's existing interests, even though it wasn't strictly Christian, he permitted it. Because that's one of the selfishness carve-outs you get is a super holy man. So Wolfenstein 3D came out, and that was a very violent game. And I remember he launched the game, and then there's a demo playing behind the main menu, and it showed a Nazi getting shot in the chest, blood spurting out, and him screaming, "Mein Leben!" And I remember my dad just going, sheet, white as a sheet. And just looking at it, and then it was like down, exit, yes, and delete. So I downloaded the game later that day, and when the pendulum swung toward neglect, I would play these games in private.
And this was like Windows 95 or 3.1 when you could hide things in the command line and stuff.
Exactly. So that's when I started getting clever. So Doom came out, and the special thing about Doom was that they released the tools they developed to make the game to the gamers, so they can make their own art and levels and monsters and weapons for the game. And the truly genius thing that I think gave birth to the modern video game industry was the company that made Doom licensed the technology they used to make that game to other developers. So instead of building all your own technology from scratch over the course of 6 months to 2 years or however long, you just pay a licensing fee and build your own game on top of it. And the game you licensed is the best looking game on the freaking planet, and you're basically getting like a reflected quality off of them by using their engine. So since the tools released for free, and people that learned to use those tools and got really good at making art for those games accidentally developed marketable skills. And And those people would get paid money to relocate all over the world to go start making video games. So I was able to download games for free and train myself to make art for those games. And if I got good enough, then a company would pay to rescue me. So that's where I focused absolutely all of my effort and attention. So if I got good enough at these tools and made friends and tried to be just decent and honest and good at what I did, I could do contract work, make enough money to save up, get an apartment, then finally get a job, and they'll pay me to move somewhere. So I realized when I was, it was officially, when I was 12 years old is when I realized that this is a career path. Because I'd played with art before. I'd been able to get the tools. I had access. And I saw an issue of PC Gamer magazine with a screenshot of one of the tools I used, 3D Studio Max. And I realized they use this tool to make video games. I can make video games. I can do this. It was the February 1997 issue of PC Gamer with Duke Nukem Forever on the cover. And that was the moment I realized this is going to be my career.
Wow.
So I started learning how to use those tools. And in joining those communities, I started to get a sense of what they were like and understanding, like, okay, these people play these games. They listen to this music. They read these books. How can I get involved? So that's when that was just before MP3s started being a thing. And then right after. So we'd be on like 56K modems sending like a single MP3, which would take like 20 or 30 minutes.
Right.
But that was the first time I was allowed to listen to secular music for the first time. Like I feel like for the very first time in my life, because I had online access to like bulletin board systems into the internet, eventually, someone finally gave me a boost up to the keyhole, and I could see what the world outside was really like for the first time.
Wow.
So I decided game development is going to be the thing that gets me out of here, and I'm going to be the best there is at it. So I invested all of my time and spent all my time trying to become a game developer. I learned like networking with people, taking tutorials, trying to become better, joining communities, joining teams that would could change all the art in an entire game to be something else for fun. Like there was a mod for Quake that completely changed it to being an alien game, and of course it got taken off the internet instantly because Fox. But that was the kind of thing that was cool to do. That's how you would prove yourself as an artist and get the attention of a big studio and get hired. And there were no studios in Oklahoma. Actually, interesting. There was a studio called 2015 that ended up that was based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that was like that was the main place I was trying to apply and think of because it was close. Most other game development is on the coasts.
Yeah.
That team ended up being it ended up creating Medal of Honor and then Call of Duty after they got acquired and moved out west. But they were my target for the longest time. So I busted ass for years. I've been making money as a contract artist since I was 12, like hiding my age from people because I was very literate. I did not see my age, and I acted like people that were older. And I was good enough at the art that people assumed I was 5 to 10 years older. So I became part of these communities. I wrote tutorials. I became like a prominent voice. I marketed myself. Everything that just scared the shit out of me because the only thing that mattered to me was getting out, starting my life, getting away from them, and then surviving. And I've been working professionally since I was 16.
Wow.
My first game that was published on store shelves internationally was when I was 16 years old.
Wow. That's amazing.
It was. I will never forget the moment that I saw it on the store shelves. This thing that I did, like just in the middle of all the abuse of my parents, in the middle of all the ridiculousness and them trying to get me to quit the industry, everything they tried to do to stop me, I was able to succeed and push past them. And I held the evidence of it in my hands. And I've still sometimes talked to people that have played the game and remember it fondly, even though it was a tiny little nothing game. But it was the first tangible thing that I'd really worked on. And backing up slightly, the thing that attracted me the most to art in games is because it's not that subjective. It's a very specific technical skill. You can make things look good, but the parameters and requirements for it are so stringent and so limited by the technology of the day,
Yeah.
uh, and it changes so quickly. The challenges are unbelievable, and it was before there were really good tutorials or documentation on how it worked. It was like the Wild West.
Right.
But at the same time, things either worked or they didn't. There's no way to just say like, "Oh, what a great effort," or "Oh, that's good enough," or "Oh, that's nice." It's the game. Either the game crashes to your desktop, going, "What the hell did you do?" or it doesn't.
Hmm.
And in a weird way, I clung to that as a source of truth, a source of objectivity, a sort like an input, a system of input and output governed by specific rules that were not subject to the person that was explaining them to me. That was subject to their interpretation or their agenda or their will. It was
Yeah.
just a soulless machine that merely required a certain type of input that I could experiment with and learn and get a sense of finesse for. And
Yeah.
I devoted myself to just being. I had all the machinery within me to worship a thing, to devote myself to a thing, to define myself by a thing and my relation to it. But when I stepped away from Christianity, like I took away the thing that fueled that, the reason for all of that apparatus to be there. But all that apparatus still existed. All
Hmm.
those urges, all my pining toward acceptance, toward achieving something, toward getting something done. I I put all that effort toward games and art and being good at making it work,
Yeah.
and it got me out. I moved out on my own when I was 19 years old after a lot of effort and a lot of pain, and um, my so my parents tried to suppress my career at first until I started making more money than my dad, who was a scammer.
Hmm.
So from when I was 16 and that game came out, and I was actually making not great money. I mean, barely enough to. I don't even think it was. In Oklahoma was probably enough to live on if I'd been of age. I looked into emancipation. I was just close enough that it just wasn't worthwhile. But my parents soon saw me as an income source, so they started, because I was under 18, just taking my money for themselves and trying to control me and make sure that I never move away so that I can keep providing for them.
Oh God.
Because despite their efforts, I ended up being a pretty good earner.
And it makes, I mean, given what you had gone through just through your childhood, it makes sense that the video games, which is a lot of games are games that are referred to as like on rails. You've got,
Yeah, yeah.
but you've also got independence. And the thing about games is that you have the ability to have volition, and that's what was missing in your life. And also, to what
Yes.
you were saying, you have you have clear sets of rules, and it's not fickle like your father's whims were. So it makes sense that video games were both the skill that you could create and an art form that would speak to you so deeply and fill that need. That's incredible that you were able to use that as your own sort of sense of providing fulfillment as well as liberation, like literal liberation.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful vehicle for me. I didn't it's actually I didn't tell people until I was 30 how old I really was. At that point, I'd been working professionally for 14 years. But even some of my my close friends knew how old I was, but most people didn't, just because I conducted myself differently, and I took great pains to hide how old I was because I would be judged for it. So I just learned. So it's kind of weird now is I'm at a point in my career where I'm like 5 to 10 years ahead of my peers,
Mm.
and I'm I've also found in retrospect that the game industry ended up being a similar quasi-authoritarian, abusive type of situation, but it was so keyed into what I needed at the time that it was the perfect thing. I just needed something to be religious at
Yeah.
without, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Gamergate in 2014,
Oh, yeah.
everything like all online harassment is sort of seen through the filter of pre and post Gamergate now. Yeah. So I mean, the gaming industry has reputations for being problematic in different areas, but that doesn't. It's a huge industry. It's bigger than Hollywood. So
It's staggering.
yeah. So there's got to be a lot of opportunities for both health and abuse. So that it's unfortunate that you landed in another sort of bad environment, but I'm glad
It
that
got me where I needed.
yeah, yeah.
I, I felt myself more and more able to rise to those challenges and equip myself against that sort of thing. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually in a great situation now. I'm working. I work for a tech company outside of the game industry, but I service the game industry, and I'm able to work from home. I don't have any of the same stresses. I feel respected. Um,
Yeah, that's great.
I feel valuable. I get to travel a lot for work, which is really fun. After this many years, I finally found a stable point that wasn't just trying to continue the survival mode, the
Mm-hmm.
desperate survival mode that I started when I was trying to get out of my home. Because honestly, the desperation to get out, that never really tapered off because I was always afraid, like, what if the one thing I'm putting 130% effort into is the only thing that makes any of this work?
Mm.
Because I don't have a lot of like history to look back on or a lot of experience to understand how those sort of things can work. It's to some degree, just coming from a homeschooling background, absolutely everything I do every day is just pants-fillingly terrifying
Mm.
because I was taught to fear the world and fear everyone in it.
Yeah.
Everyone's out to murder me. Everyone's out to kill us. Everyone hates Christians. All we and just you got to band together.
Mm-hmm.
My dad used to say, we're dead to the world and alive unto Christ," which is a bastardization of a scripture. I found out later. But any time that he would be rejected from like his kicked out of a church or rejected by friends or family that realized he was like an abuser or manipulator, or anytime I'd have like a heartbreaking social interaction that remind me of how broken and shitty I am, you just say, "Remember, we are dead unto the world and alive unto Christ," and use that as a justification. Like, the more the world hates us, the bigger the boner Jesus has for what we're doing. To be coarse, that was basically the thing. The more people hate us, yeah,
Yeah.
and we see that in the kind of alt-right type stuff today. But
Right. Yeah, definitely. We definitely there's a lot of commonality there between those responses of yes, we're being persecuted. That means we're doing the right thing instead of like having a modicum of self-reflection and and
seriously.
thinking about why are people reacting this way towards what we're doing.
Exactly. And that's why the
Yeah.
that's why all the QAnon Facebook groups on Thanksgiving are so funny and sad.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to actually pivot towards the last couple of weeks and the sort of conversations that have broken through in different ways. That is really tied specifically to two hashtags. The first one being exposed Christian schools, and the second related one being exposed Christian homeschooling. Just prior to those breaking through and starting to trend in the United States, you wrote a really moving Twitter thread about your upbringing, and then you brought that into that exposed Christian homeschooling conversation as well, like the subsequent week. I want to hear from you just what you think is really important about this conversation happening and why these things need to be highlighted so that folks understand that there are children like that are going through similar things that you did.
It's Thank you. I writing that story was really, really difficult because I've had to make up for my own lack of education to such a degree. I have to with so little experience in life or with people, I have to learn like what kind of information do I prioritize? Like how do I learn how to be somebody? So like music and media was one big way. A career is another big way. Being active in the church or being active like socially is another way. I'm I'm frequently almost crippled by it's a combination of fear of missing out and fear of not applying my attention to the right sorts of things that I need to be learning.
Mm.
Because like one of my big insecurities growing up was music and my inability to relate to people on music. Because when you're young and you're learning how to be, I realize now in retrospect, um, you're just trying to stake a claim on being a person, and when you've been denied personhood and agency for so long, the baby steps are just it's it's embarrassing and kind of tragic. Like oh my god, I for example, like I never heard U2 until I was like 24, 25 years old.
Mm.
It never came up. It wasn't a part of my normal media. It wasn't a part of my experience. Most other people have experienced things passively over a longer period of time. I did not have that luxury. So
Right.
when I feel like the crush of like people saying like you've never listened to YouTube, what the fuck is wrong with? Are you retarded? Like quote unquote. That's not a term I like using. That's what I've been called. Um,
Yeah.
just being viciously mocked for not having something in common. Even tonight, like a couple hours ago, someone mentioned the name of a band I didn't recognize, and I didn't realize they were referring to music. I was just completely blank trying to figure out from context what this person was talking about. And they said, oh, that's right. I forget that you don't know any music. And he wasn't being rude about it. He wasn't trying to be rude. It's usually not out of rudeness, but it's just it stings so fucking much. Just being the one person in the room that everybody is thinking about. You're in my mind just imagining how could this person get to this stage in life and not know something as basic as this? And the crippling fear of missing out is like, okay, when I encounter that, does that mean I listen to everything U2 has ever done and become an ultra fan in a short amount of time? Do I write this off and just hope it doesn't come up again? How do
Mm.
I even begin to prioritize these kinds of things that I've run into, and how do I apply like a weight to how important they are?
Yeah.
Like is learning how to interact in a classroom environment more important than having a deep understanding of the back catalog of Madonna? I don't fucking know. I have no way of knowing.
Right.
I enjoy them both now. I think they're great. I've managed to kind of like passively get that sort of thing, but occasionally I'll get like a well-meaning person that tries to like get me caught up or tries to say, "Oh no, trust me, you'll recognize this. You'll recognize this when you hear it." I never do, and that only makes me feel worse. So just so many moments in my life like that. Even the video game industry, my chosen career. I'm 18 years into this industry now, professionally. I never had a Nintendo. I haven't played the original like Mario or Zelda games because my dad thought Nintendo was evil. I even in my own industry, I lack so much of like the common history of everybody, and I just have to kind of like smile or leave the room or pretend and not draw attention to myself when
Hmm.
all of it to me, because of how sensitive I am to this lack, it
Right.
seems like everybody is just sort of bathing in nostalgia. Just like, isn't it great remembering all these things we had in common? Like, remember how cool it was to like this class in high school or this sort of thing. Or like Dazed and Confused, the movie, just brings me to tears. Just for I never had an experience of like a bunch of kids going to a party. I didn't
Yeah.
have peers. I didn't have friends. I didn't know anybody growing up. I don't have these. There's so many parts of pop culture in media that have like this nostalgia for very specific situational circumstances and experiences that
Hmm.
they all seem to harken back to, especially in popular media. Like, exposed Christian schools, exposed Christian homeschooling. One of the things I saw come up, someone was asking if kissing booths are real. That is, I've seen kissing booths in so much media. I mean, like Boy Meets World, or like sitcoms from the '90s, Touched by an Angel. Just like my only view into the outside world in many circumstances is what I was able to sneak watch on TV when my parents didn't lock it down or weren't trying to like cloister me off for their spiritual affectation.
Yeah.
It's being able to relate to small things like that with people is so important and so makes you feel so isolated and alone and wrong. Like as a state of being,
Hmm.
wrong. You are wrong. The way you are is wrong. Like you're not actively doing anything. It's just your existence. It's wrong. It's wrong to everybody. Like why are you this way? It's your fault. It's not my fault, obviously, but no one's going to give me the benefit of the doubt. Nobody's going to give me a chance. That's why I've spent my entire life hiding that sort of thing. Perhaps overzealously, perhaps unnecessarily. But the thing that I found the most in Ellen finding you, finding Chris Stroop, finding Johnny Scaramanga, finding the Evangelical hashtag, finding these hashtags, these communities, I've been able to find not exactly belonging because I mean, this is more rehab than community, I think, still, which is fine. We're at
Yeah,
a stage.
that's a fair, that's that's fair, I think, because a lot of people are still they're at different stages, and it can often be like a transitional thing. And the other element is that like there's no expectation of some sort of dogmatic unity, or that
Great point.
or that you have a or that you make this about your entire life, like evangelicalism expects you to like submit everything to that lifestyle. I joked on Twitter
Yes.
the other day that it would evangelicalism was the real alternative lifestyle all along.
If that isn't your pinned tweet, may I
I,
recommend?
I should I should make it that.
It's a
um,
tremendous point. There's no expectation to devote your life to it,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
I've had my own difficulties in like getting involved in the community because I was trying that hard, like thinking like, oh, this is the purpose, the cause, the thing I devote my life to. Those
yeah.
are there's like the bare minimum terms I'm used to thinking.
Sure, absolutely, and that's how we were taught to frame things. But really, it's not. It's about an acknowledgement of our commonalities more than and it being both a repudiation of the where we came from and an affirmation of the things that we were told to condemn. But then a lot of the things about what you what you think about whether there's a God or whatever else, that is of much lesser importance, because people are going to make their own decisions about that. But the more important thing is that we can find other people that have similar experiences, even if they're not exact. There's people that can relate, and that in a lot of ways is powerful in and of itself.
It's incredible. Just so, even something as slight as someone remembering like the goofy cartoon characters that accelerated Christian education used in all their terrible curricula, or hey, remember this Jars of Clay song, Flood?
Yeah.
Remember when DC Talk switched to rap, then to alternative? What will people think when they know that I'm a Jesus freak? Like,
Right.
and just even things like that, just like a tiniest bit of commonality of
Oh, sure.
I
Like,
I'd mentally written off. the entire concept of having any sort of culture or people or anything, basically ages 0 through 19, being
Hmm.
able to have anything that I can look back on that anyone would not only remember but relate to, and not just look at as either something pathetic or something I'm joking about. Just the tiniest bit of validation. Someone else has felt this. Someone else has gone through this. Someone else has felt a similar type of thing. It's not all one to one, but it's all the same kind of thing. And I, it made me feel like I suddenly found that I actually do have like a high school class that I can email or meet with, and just like,
Right.
oh shit, that's right, it's our 15-year high school whatever, and we just found each other again. It
Yeah.
just the having any relevant aspect of that life understood by anybody else made me feel so much more validated and understood in being.
Yeah.
And
That's
the
awesome.
the one the one quote that after I understood the healthy things I can get out of this without my natural inclination to be like, involve yourself 150%, do all the things. The one phrase that really set me free, I got to say, I I I wish I could remember where I got this. You are not responsible for fixing the system that failed you.
Mm.
That that set me free, even in the midst of my book. Like, I didn't. I'm still trying to define the relationship I want to have with the religion, with where I am, with what I've been through. I'm not terribly interested in learning what's new about it, like in regards to what they're teaching themselves in the culture.
Yeah.
I'm I don't think I have the mental or emotional energy to like debate or fight. Just I honestly, I like after I'm greatly enjoying this with you, but I'm probably gonna take like a day or two like off of Twitter for the most part, just with an emotional hangover, just
Sure.
to
Yeah.
deal with this. So I have to plumb up. So the the community and the hashtags will give me a better idea of how I relate, how I want to relate, and the connection I want to have
Yeah.
with these things, with the
Right.
understanding that I'm I'm not being conscripted. It's not an army. It's not like you can
No.
have a cause that isn't taught to you as like literally God's army imagery. Out of curiosity, did you ever get any of like the U.S. military imagery in your experience?
So like I went to fairly moderate churches. Um, like United Methodist churches, where a lot of evangelical influence entered into my life was like through youth group material and other things like that. And eventually, also, I chose to go to an evangelical college. But there was always like you know veneration of the military. The U.S. flag was always up alongside the Christian flag at whatever church we went to.
Oh God, the Christian flag! I forgot that.
Yeah, yeah. And
Ugh.
then, I mean, there wasn't a ton, but it would usually be on like Memorial Day or Labor Day or Veterans Day. Those sorts of things where it would be made to be some sort of metaphor for something you know dodgy. uh,
Interesting.
and that would probably be a little different at like my grandparents' church, because they were a small, like independently run, like sort of de facto Baptist church in southern Indiana. So that had some different cultural. Indiana is a weird place. It's sort of hard to
Yes.
describe. Um,
We have the
so
half-hour daylight savings time zone offset for one thing.
yeah, no, there's three time zones
There are
in
three?
yeah. South Bend, like the South Bend, Gary, like the area just close to Chicago goes with Chicago. Then there's a big part in the center, and then there's the southern part. So it's insane. It's a crazy
Wacky.
place. There's no reason for it. Anyways, that's a funny tangent. But anyways, so like the military connection wasn't huge, but it was present.
Interesting. That's one of the other things I found fascinating about getting involved like in the hashtags is seeing other people's experiences. Like I had a very like we are God's army like type of experience. Like they do like ritual like military marches and chanting and songs. It was
Yeah,
very like rote and really
right.
drilled into us. But at the same time, we I know that other people have had different experiences. In accelerated Christian education, for example, there was like a lot of fetishization of Israel and Israel worship, whereas in other aspects of evangelical and Christian education, that is alarmingly the opposite.
Yeah.
It's but seeing like the gradients between all these beliefs, like we're so like speaking in tongues, slaying the spirit, dancing, was that like did that factor in much to your experience?
I had more exposure to that in college, and that there were a couple of like, so my I went to a Christian college, Indiana Wesleyan. My second year, I was a floor chaplain because that was a thing in the dorms. And there was a very
Wow.
there's
Is that
a
like an RN or in addition
no, it
to
was like a different. So there was an RA for the floor, but then there
RA?
was
Sorry.
yeah, there was an RA for the floor, but then there was also a floor chaplain, which was, and then there were 6 floors in my dorm, so there was floor chaplains and one like dorm chaplain. It was insane.
Wow.
So, anyways, I ran a couple of like Bible studies, and then they sort of got taken over by this charismatic group, and that was sort of the speaking in tongues sort of thing. I my family
Ah.
also went to my family also growing up. We would every year we would go on these mission trips to the same area outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and we'd help build houses for poverty-stricken community,
Oh wow.
and we would always partner. So it was a little different in that it was like short-term missions have come under fire legitimately. So this was more of like a annual partnership with the same organization. We stayed at the same church, and it was a African Methodist Episcopal Church, an AME church, and their style of worship is way different. And so I saw more sort of praise oriented. Sometimes there would be like anointing oils and things, but there would never be like the Midwestern white speaking in tongues you mentioned before.
Yeah,
So that was a totally like separate cultural experience. That was like my experience of being the minority in an area for the first time, and having that exposure once every year had a different type of effect on me. But so
that's
tongues
fascinating.
was always, I don't know, like Methodists are fairly emotionally repressed. And that like my family wasn't big on emotion to begin with. So
That I know exactly what you mean. That's just an exquisitely funny and telling way of phrasing it.
it's, I don't know, it's a Midwestern thing. There's that I forget, it might be like John Mulaney or another comedian that has a bit about, you know, like Irish people, and they're, your son dies and they're just like, bury him, bury the boy, don't, don't cry, and it's like, that's an element. Anyways, yeah, we're not here to, that's a different
But
tangent though.
no,
So,
but so that's a fascinating example of like the difference of experience. Even
oh,
though
for sure.
we're part of the same world, I never would have known that kind of difference, or I never knew short-term missions were a thing. In my experience, it was just a bunch of white assholes that wanted to go to Costa Rica that wouldn't feed people till they gave them Bibles.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mean, like Corey Pig that does field missionary, and like Jamie the Very Worst Missionary. Those are people that have like, that's what they talk about in their work
I
because
didn't
it's
know about
so,
those guys. Those names are amazing.
yeah. 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 Jamie Wright, she's a great, writer, and she wrote a book called The Very Worst Missionary. It's another like spiritual memoir similar to yours. Um, and
Nice.
yeah, and then Corey Pig has his own podcast project too. So yeah, missions is a whole other thing, and it's not something that I have a ton of experience in, but yeah, that is a big part of it. It's like tourism for well-meaning but maybe not so well-meaning Christians.
Seriously, like
So
one of the two friends I had growing up, his younger sister wanted to be a missionary. She went to Costa Rica, did the whole like spiritual colonialism thing, and
yeah,
wanted to make that a big part of her life.
and that's one of the only
Well,
things women are really allowed to do in some evangelical circles too, is be a missionary. Because you couldn't teach another white person, but you could teach someone of a different race. You know, that sort of
so you have
seriously.
like they have the
There's a
pecking
lot of like
orders.
white supremacy and just racism there that just goes unspoken.
Seriously, it's like I know exactly what you mean. It's like, well, you may be a woman, but at least you're white. It's so weird how. Yeah, well, anyway, fortunately, she ended up breaking away from the church and becoming a lesbian, and so I'm glad she broke away from that entire thing, that hellish life. What's funny was that was like a family full of homeschoolers. They all turned out like really not at all like they intended.
Hmm.
It was actually they were my only homeschooling friends growing up. I remember I got baptized in their above ground pool.
Oh, okay.
The chlorine burned my eyes. I remember that very vividly.
Oh,
Just having any kind of like homeschool friends growing up to validate some kind of experiences with something.
yeah, yeah. I want to ask you one other question about like the hashtag and especially the response that we've seen to it. There's been a lot of hand wringing in a lot of conservative outlets, including Fox News, the Daily Caller. Matt Walsh did an entire podcast about it. All these people decrying what's being said in the hashtag, both expose Christian schools in particular, and as well as expose Christian homeschooling. What is your read on that as someone who is a survivor? Who I mean, you literally survived your education and those first 19 years of your life. What is your sort of read on the way it's being portrayed and reacted to, with once it sort of broke out into this wider area of media coverage?
I feel like it's very reflexive, knee-jerk, reactive, and any story that doesn't quote Chris Droop for having started the hashtag in the first place is journalistic malpractice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's I don't really feel like we have been fully, fairly covered yet. It's if you're not going to talk to the people that are like the contrary voice of this entire thing, then what are you doing? Why are you writing? You're a propagandistic outlet essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's been dismaying just to see the lack of interaction, the lack of contact. There's a lack of respect for our side of things, because frankly, I would say that you and I know more than most people that are that a lot of people that are currently in the system or have been, because we've seen like the full spectrum of shittiness, of how bad things can be, how twisted they can get, even with the best of intentions. We understand like the cumulative effects of that, and I think that those are worth listening to. And I think it's really frustrating to be dismissed as just as a blindly hateful, anti-Christian whatever. It's like, no, I've typed the Bible 15 times by hand because I was forced into this. I know most of these things better than the people that are arguing it with me. I'm hoping that over time more voices will rise up and more nuance will enter the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not blindly like anti-Christian or anti-hate or pro-hate or just like Christians are the worst. It's just that's what I am the most familiar with because I literally grew up in that world, and it's the thing that I can speak the most accurately to. I think most people are too defensive about that. Right. I understand, it's your religion, it's who you are, and they have fanciful ideas about criticism actually adding up to something.
Yeah.
Like some physical, tangible kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's well said. Well, Jon, I am so thankful that we got to talk and cover a lot of your life. I still feel like we really just scratched the surface, and there's tons of things that we could continue to talk about. But I want to be respectful of your time. I know that we're talking later, and you're at a later time zone than I am, actually. So, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think that we should close with? Or anything close with? Oh my gosh, that sounds like a church thing. Sorry. Sorry.
I'd say the main thing is you're not alone. There are other people out there with your experience. Everything can get better. If you feel the need for self-harm or suicide, it's not necessary, and there are people that will help you. I understand. I've been there too. There is hope. There is help. There is love. There is a world outside of that.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Where can people find you online? Where can they find your book?
I am at JonJones on Twitter, Jon Jones. I have jonjones.com, and my book is How I Escaped Evangelical Hell, and it is available on Amazon Kindle and in paperback on Amazon.
Awesome. Jon, thanks so much for sharing your story with me and for talking.
Blake, thank you so much for everything you've done to help give us a voice. Thank you for taking the time for me, and just I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your voice. We are very lucky to have you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.